They probably didn't mind getting some cash.
Don't.
Virginia.
That is very true. You're just in time.
Oh, yeah, and the black cat sitting here too. Where's
That's
the raven?
right.
Indeed, we got the cats in. Oh, yeah. Well, they would attack ravens if we had them.
Is that? Oh, two keys. Is one named Raven?
One's Pluto and one's Edgar.
Oh, really?
All right, so hello, folks. Hello, everyone here at the Poe Museum in the Poe Shrine, and hello to everyone out in Facebook watching us. As I usually do, I'm going to give a little introduction to where we are right now, because this space is so perfect to do this sort of thing, to read Poe's work, to do programs based on his work. So I want to tell you a little bit about where we are. And today, people out on Facebook can't see this. We have both the cats sitting in the front row right now, and now one of them staring back at the audience. That is Edgar, who's looking back at you, and this is Pluto, sitting right next to our guest, Brad Harper, who I'll talk more about in just a minute. If you didn't already know, Edgar and Pluto were born right behind this shrine about 6.5 years ago. They have lived here ever since. They are, as you can see, very friendly, very confident, very comfortable around people. Edgar was named for obvious reasons. Pluto was named after the cat in Poe's story, The Black Cat, which is a great story, well worth reading. And now you have to read it since you've met Pluto. The easiest way to tell the difference between the two cats is that Pluto has a collar on him. So this one's Pluto up here, and Edgar does not because he keeps taking it off. Pluto also has more white on him. He's got a bit more white on his chest and his belly, essentially. All right, so this is the Poe Shrine. When this museum opened in 1922, it was just the old stone house and this garden, including this shrine. The garden was landscaped with Poe's poetry in mind. The founders of this museum read through his poems. They picked out references to plants, to objects, to flowers, things that are found in the poems, and they incorporated them into the landscaping of the garden. They paid special attention to one poem in particular. It's a poem called 2-1 in Paradise. It's not one of his better-known poems, but as Poe did several times, especially sort of early in his career, he would write a story and write a poem and put the poem in the story. 2-1 in Paradise is from a story called The Assignation, which is a dark story. It's a good story, but still among his early works. It's dark. It's about a suicide pact and infanticide, but it has a pretty little poem in it, or at least the first stanza is pretty. The first few lines are, "Thou wast that all to me, love, for which my soul did pine. A green isle in the sea, love, a fountain and a shrine, all wreathed with fairy fruits and flowers, and all the flowers were mine." So this is the Green Isle, the grass that stretches out all the way to the old stone house. The fountain is right there, and we are in the shrine. The shrine was built out of bricks from the Southern Literary Messenger. Those of you who are here will learn all about the Southern Literary Messenger when you go through the buildings of the museum. It was the literary magazine that Poe had his first job on. It was 4 blocks away from here at 15th and Main Streets. And in the 19-teens, the building was still here. The founders of this museum wanted to put the museum there. So they tried to get the city to not demolish it. That failed. The city demolished the building, so the founders brought the bricks over here and used them to create this shrine. So again, this is a perfect place to do readings of Poe's work and programs about Poe. Today I have a guest speaker or a guest reader, and I will introduce him soon, but more importantly, I'm going to let him talk to you about himself. But before we do that, I wanted to read to you Poe's great poem, The Raven, because our speaker, Brad Harper, and his topic will be based directly on The Raven. So The Raven, briefly, of course, is Poe's most famous work. It came out in 1845. It's a masterpiece of trochaic octameter, a form that most poets don't work in. Poe was very proud of how he put it together. He wrote a whole essay about it, in which, on the one hand, he's bragging about how he structured it, and it is pretty much untouched trochaic octameter all the way through. He pulls out a syllable from the second, fourth, and fifth lines deliberately. He puts rhymes in it, again, regularly throughout each stanza, and he writes all about how he's proud of it, but he's also sort of trying to demystify it. He says, well, O's and R's are good sounds, so I put them together. That's why it shows the word nevermore. He says stuff like this because only a year after The Raven comes out, he's kind of sick of it, because it's sort of it's a sensation. It becomes the thing he's best known for, and it kind of overshadows everything else that he's done. But still, at the least, a very interesting poem. So I'm going to read it now, The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. Distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had tried to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is, I was napping. And so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word Lenore. Merely this and nothing more. Then into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon I heard again a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obese and stately, not an instant stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no sublunary being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Wondering at the stillness broken by replies so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters in its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, who whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster. So when hope he would adjure, stern despair returned. Instead of the sweet hope he dared adjure, that sad answer, nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er. But whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by angels whose faint footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Let me quaff this kind nepenthe and forget this lost Lenore, quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still of bird or devil, whether tempter sent or the tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there, balm in Gilead, tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beat from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. Thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next guest speaker, Mr. Brad Harper, who won our Poe Inspires contest at the birthday bash for the poetry section. I'm going to let him tell us all about that. Mr. Brad Harper.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad there's a live audience here because microphones and cameras still bother me. I'm a retired pathologist, so if you don't say anything and stay real still, I'll be much more comfortable. Now, I did 37 years in the Army because I couldn't find honest work. And one assignment I had, I was the clinic commander, and once a week for 3 hours or more, I had to attend a meeting. The 3-star general summoned all the principals on the base, and the chaplain and I would sit in the farthest corner and try to keep each other awake until the very end. He'd say, "Chaplain, anything?" Chaplain would say, "Nothing to report, sir." "Doc, anything?" "Nothing to report, sir." And we leave, all knowing that next week we come again. So one particularly very long meeting, I wrote my poem I called Staff Call, which is loosely based upon the Raven, and the staff here liked it, and I was able to recite this at the birthday bash. Now, before I launch into my much shorter poem, take it easy. Since I retired from the Army 37 years, 4 months, 9 days, I started writing, and I'm very pleased to say that my very first and so far only book, A Knife in the Fog, which involves Arthur Conan Doyle and the hunt for Jack the Ripper, was a finalist for the Edgar Award. And I was in New York City 2 weeks ago to congratulate the actual winner, who wrote Bearskin, an excellent book. I highly recommend it. And so I said, there's a large room of people whose books I read over the years, wearing much more expensive clothes than mine, but I had a wonderful time. Anyway, so there it is. I have a couple books to sell if anybody's at least been interested, and there is that. So my I've given you the background for the poem. This is a much more humorous take on Poe's masterpiece. Yes.
Brett, could you tell us a little bit about the contest itself? So I didn't do a very good job explaining that.
Well, every year for the birthday bash, they have a contest, and there's different parts. I submitted my poem for the poetry contest. Was also a short story, I believe, and everything has to be based upon some work of Edgar Allan Poe. And I wrote this 20 years ago now, it seems like. But so I edited it a little bit, but probably 90% of this poem is as I wrote it. And I slipped it to the chaplain, and he almost broke out in laughter. He gave me a dirty look afterwards. But that's how I spent the taxpayers' money that day, trying to stay away. Anything else, Keith?
No, I think that's fine.
All right, so here we go. So I very, how should I say, inspired. I call it staff call. Once upon a staff call dreary, while I pondered weak and weary upon many issues rediscussed, which had been resolved of yore, while I sat there nearly napping, suddenly there came some clapping, like the sound of sea waves lapping, or echo of the ocean's roar. 'Tis the ending of this meeting, that for which I've so longed for, which was just the third of 30 briefers, sitting down and nothing more. Onward ever on we labored, like swimmers towards some distant shore. Every time we thought we progressed, the tide would take us out once more. Like the Red Queen ever sprinting, no matter how quickly on we bore, at the end of all our struggle, no more finished than before. Can this tedium be unending? Must this time be such a bore? Is my sentence so unbending that I am not allowed to snore? Like the air to one a drowning, when the end at last was sure, I grabbed my coat and quickly gowning, rushing headlong out the door. But my freedom, so sweet tasting, is but the fleeting joy du jour. For the bitter truth o'erhangs me. I'll be back next week for more. Thank you very much. And it's a great honor and privilege to be here. I hope you enjoyed my little poem.
All right. Thank you very much, Brad. That was fun. I thought, actually, since today's Mother's Day, Poe did write a poem, I think I brought it, called To My Mother. So I thought I might as well read that one before we depart. Poe wrote a few sonnets in his time, not a lot. He wrote 3, I think. This one is from very late in his life, in fact, the last year of his life, 1849. And he followed the Elizabethan sonnet format. It's typically called the Shakespearean sonnet format, although Shakespeare did not invent it. He just kind of made it famous. And I think by 1849, Poe knew how to use the format. Now, it's called To My Mother, but if you know anything about Poe, you'll know probably that he's not really talking about his biological mother here. He's talking about his aunt, who became his mother-in-law, and who he thought of very much as his mother. So this is his sonnet to my mother on Mother's Day. Because I feel that in the heavens above, the angels, whispering to one another, can find among their burning terms of love none so devotional as that of mother. Therefore, by that sweet name I long have called you, you who are more than mother unto me, and fill my heart of hearts where death installed you, in setting my Virginia's spirit free. My mother, my own mother, who died early, was but the mother of myself. But you are mother to the one I loved so dearly, and thus are dearer than the mother I knew. By that infinity with which my wife was dearer to my soul than its soul life. That is to my mother. And he mentions Virginia, that is the name of Poe's wife, and thus the name of his mother-in-law's daughter. So again, Poe lived with these women, Maria Clem, his aunt, and her daughter Virginia. He lived with them as essentially mother and sister. He called them Muddy as a diminutive for mother, and Sissy as a diminutive for sister. And then 4 years later, he turns them into wife and mother-in-law. And this is at the end of his life. Virginia has died, and that's when he's talking about where death installed you and setting my Virginia's spirit free. But Muddy is still alive. She will survive Poe by a number of years. So this is Poe's sonnet to his mother, who's actually his aunt and mother-in-law, at the very end of Poe's life. All right, so thank you. Any questions about anything for me or for Brad? Or about the museum? Anything? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your time here.
Thank you.